Hello, everybody, and welcome. Welcome to the UN. Welcome to the Gender Dialogues on Unfinished Business. My name is Mette Valsted Vestergaard. I'm a journalist, and I'm going to be your moderator for today. And I promise I'll come back a little later with a few more words on the agenda for today and what we're trying to achieve today. Right now, we'll just let you in on one little tradition that I have when I do moderation, and that is that every time somebody new enters the stage, and even when they leave it, we applaud wildly to make them feel welcome. So I think we can start out right away because for our opening remarks and to introduce the topic of today, please welcome UN Undersecretary General and Executive Director of UNOPS, Mrs. Greta Ferramo. Now we applaud.
Yeah, if only the walk up to the stage had been longer. But dear Excellencies, special guests and UN city personnel, it's such a great honor and pleasure to welcome you all to UN City, to actually the 11 organizations that are located here, and I think now more and more personnel. I think we are touching on 1,700 and going up. My name is, as you heard, Grete Farmo. I am the Executive Director of UNOPS. And why am I here? Well, actually, UNOPS is the only organization that is headquartered in Copenhagen. I am very happy to welcome you to this first of the gender dialogues. And it's, I think, Antonio Guterres, our Secretary General, who voiced the reason why this meeting is, or these meetings are important. He actually said, achieving gender equality and empowering women and girls is the unfinished business of our time and the greatest human rights challenge in our world. His voice is backed up by evidence from many sources. And last year, our colleagues in UN Women provided some stark numbers. Globally, around 15 million primary school-aged girls are out of school, compared to 10 million boys. Women hold only 24% of parliamentary seats. The gender pay gap stands at 23%. And gender-based violence remains a global pandemic. This year, the World Bank found that women's legal rights are equal to men in only 6 countries in the world. Another report by the World Economic Forum found that based on current trends, it will take 108 years to close the gender gap. In this report, the gap is measured across 4 pillars: economic opportunities, political empowerment, educational attainment, and health and survival. 2 key areas are highlighted to address this trend: productive dialogue and proactive implementation. And with this in mind, the organizations behind this event, UNOPS, together with the embassies of Australia, Ireland, and Norway, started to discuss how we could address this issue in our way. The gender dialogues is an outcome of these discussions, and today is the first of 3 events planned over the next year. Of course, many more organizations care deeply about this case, as can be seen also across this room today. And I'm glad to see so many men here too, because we need you as partners in this journey. I want to thank you all for your enthusiasm and for adding your voice to the calls to address this challenge. Because in most countries, the focus on women and girls in the Sustainable Development Goals is yet to turn into practice. If we truly want to solve the world's biggest problems, we need to work together across issues, across sectors and geographies. And again, this is why we're here today. And I am keenly looking forward to the discussions over the coming couple of hours. And I also would like from stage to thank Patricia and her team for organizing and making this happen. Patricia Moser is director of our procurement group in UNOPS. I can tell you she is quite busy anyway, but took the time together with good colleagues to make this happen. And I wish the event every success. And without further ado, I pass on the floor to Caroline Rusten, my good colleague from UN Women. I'm sure that you have something to tell us, maybe going a bit beyond the numbers that I mentioned. And we are here to listen to you as well. Please take the floor, Caroline.
Thank you so much. Thank you to UNOPS for organizing this, and to the embassies of Ireland, Norway and Australia. We in UN Women, who are the UN agency responsible for SDG 5 on gender equality, are very, very proud of UNOPS that you're taking on this torch, and also for the embassies to work together with you to do that. So I'm very honored to be here. I would like to leave you with 3 messages. The first one is that we only have a few years left to end gender inequality, and we need to run a lot faster. So you all know that in the Agenda 2030, we have said we're going to end gender equality by 2030. So that's 11 years to go. And with the numbers, or the 108 years that Grete Faremo was mentioning, you can understand we need to run at least 10 years faster. In some places in the world, we need to run much faster than that. You may not know that the gender gap will close sooner in the Middle East and North Africa than it will do in North America. In North America, it will take 165 years at current pace to reach gender equality. We are doing reasonably well to close the gender equality gap in health and education. Although there are certain areas, if we think about the kind of future needs that we have in the labor market, for example, artificial intelligence, we are not yet there. But otherwise, those are some of the areas where we're doing reasonably well. But the biggest gender gap is in political and economic leadership. And that is actually disastrous, because that is where decisions are made. So it's time to act. We need to run much faster, and we need to be impatient. Please don't be patient. Be impatient, and complacency will not change the world, but impatience will. So please don't be nice girls out there. The second topic is the importance of multilateralism. As you know, Agenda 2030, the UN Council Resolution on Women, Peace and Security, and the Beijing Platform for Action on Gender Equality, they were all the results of countries coming together to achieve common results. And that is really, really important. But this is under threat, and I think you all know that. Women's rights are under threat. Human rights defenders are under threat. Now, if all rights were abolished from one day to another, we would all be out on the street. But when you pluck the chicken one feather at a time, You don't really notice before there's nothing left. And this is what we're seeing in the world today. So please pay attention. That's why to continue to push for gender equality and equal rights for everyone is important. That's why having young people understand that those rights that have been fought for, they can also be lost. And that's why we who fight for these rights without being worried, or without needing to worry about being imprisoned or being killed, we have the obligation and we have the responsibility to do so. And I think that's about solidarity, and that's one of the things we really need. The third thing I wanted to talk about is then what are some of the things we can do? If we look at, and we have a lot of embassies here, if you look at what do you want to do in the countries you work with, what are the kind of things, maybe some of the lower hanging fruits where we can do things. And we in UN Women are saying, and there can be many other things, but there's 6 things we would say. We should make sure that no country has discriminatory laws by 2030. No country in the world that we're working in should have discriminatory laws. We can influence that through our foreign policies, through multilateral agreements. We should have a roadmap for ending violence against women, through ensuring that all law enforcement bodies have gender-responsive means to address violence against women. And there are good examples in the world, and Iceland, I think, are one of those that are really leading on this, that are doing interesting things. The third is that all countries should have law that abolish child marriage. As you know, with child marriage, a lot of other things follow. It means that children will be malnourished or had a greater chance of being malnourished. It means that women will not, or girls will not end up being educated. The fourth thing, measurable support to civil society to help them prevent action against human rights defenders. This is one area where we really need more action. Law for equal pay in all countries. Some of you might have heard me saying that if there were equal pay, or in Denmark, since there are not equal pay, all women can go on Christmas leave on the 30th of November. Remember that, 13th of November. Through the lifetime, it's about 2.6 million kroner throughout lifetime. So that's not only important for a woman herself, but it's also important for a whole family. So please remember this. On 13th of November, go on Christmas leave. Thank you. The last thing, National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Securities in all countries, ensuring that women are part of peace processes. And my time is up. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for that, Caroline, especially the part about the Christmas vacation. That was positive news. Okay, I promised you just a few words on the agenda for today. We're going to have a great, I hope, panel debate up here, and we'll have some speeches introduced by their excellencies from the embassies that we spoke of before. Always looking forward to doing that. But right now, I want to pass the floor to our keynote speaker of today, Kira. You can begin moving up here. Kira is the Deputy Head for the Department for Gender Equality at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Denmark. Mrs. Kira Appel. Oh, you learned. Thank you.
Thank you. Men are afraid of women laughing at them. Women are afraid men might kill them. I believe that the author, Margaret Atwood, sums up the power relation pretty accurately in this very, very short sentence. I have worked with gender equality for 20 years in the Danish government now. And you know, my friends, they started asking me, are you really bad at your job? You know, nothing has happened. Gender equality seems to continue to be a problem. And maybe I am bad at my job, I don't know, but perhaps there is something more at stake. And I do believe that maybe there's something else wrong. And that's why I'm really, really happy to be here today at these gender dialogues. And I would really like to thank Greta and the UN, as well as the ambassadors of Australia, Ireland and Norway, for allowing me to give my take on, had 3 questions, on how gender equality has evolved, if it has evolved, where it might be going, and what are the barriers for achieving full gender equality. Well, for the first question, when I started 20 years ago, in Denmark, we already had formal gender equality. You know, we had laws, we had a minister, we had a department for gender equality, complaints board, monitoring mechanisms, mainstreaming obligations in the law, annual reports to the parliament, NGOs funding. We had everything on the formal equality. We also had quite a lot of economic, social and political empowerment. We had almost equal participation at the labor market of both men and women. We had equal access to education. We had equal participation at the national level in politics. We've even had a female prime minister. But still, there's still differences and gender equality issues. Let me just take a personal note on this. 20 years ago, my youngest son was in kindergarten. And even though we had all these things that I've just mentioned 20 years ago, and we would say, yes, we have formal equality, we have gender equality in Denmark. A mother came up to me in kindergarten and she says, so could my son play with your son? And I said, great, because they don't normally play together. And she says, yeah, that's it. And I said, so great, let's make up an appointment. And she says, yeah, because it's really important for my son to play with your son. I said, what are you getting at? And she says, it's because my son mainly plays with girls, and we're afraid he might be a little to the gay side. And your son, he plays a lot climbs trees, and he fights with other boys. And I went, what? This was a family, very modern, 2 career-pursuing parents in the creative sector, and they were still talking about gender stereotypes like that. And I said, no, you're not allowed to play with my son. My son should play with your son, so he can learn to sit down and calm down a bit instead. Anyway, so that was 20 years ago. So even though we had all these things, yes, we had gender equality issues. So what has happened since then? Well, on the positive side, we have data showing that, for instance, in Denmark, men and women are now almost on an equal basis taking care of their kids. Both mothers and fathers tend and have caring roles in the family. Also, young people, if you ask them, they would say, no, there's no gender equality problem in Denmark. We've got data on that as well. On the less positive side today, we can see that statistics actually go against these ideas. We have segregated choices of education, of labor market decisions, in horizontal and vertical labor market participation, and we still have a gender pay gap, as we just heard before. We also have emerging issues, new issues that we haven't talked about before regarding gender equality, like violence online, digital sexual harassment, and a very rapidly climb in lack of well-being amongst young people. So, in conclusion, yes, things have changed, but maybe not as much as we wanted to. So, second question, where might all this then be going? There are different but simultaneously trends going on a global scale. If you look at some countries like Denmark, we have kind of reached a stalemate. Things are progressing, but new issues are also popping up. So there are more women on boards, there are progress, but still we have problems. Then we see countries where you really can see progress. Like a lot of young girls are now participating in education. Young girls are, to a large degree, getting an education now. And then, yes, we also see a backlash. a very serious backlash. I work and am responsible for the international gender equality work in the ministry. And since I've worked with that for 20 years, I have seen this backlash, I've experienced it. And what we're seeing is that within the EU, within the global, within the UN, there is a rising resistance. There are differences in the understanding of what is gender equality. You know, what is, on the issue of women's sexual and reproductive health and rights, SRHR, that is being challenged, let's put it that way. I'm going next week to the Commission on the Status of Women, CSW, and I'm getting ready for a fight. So we do see a serious backlash. So, what do I see as one of a couple of the very important issues that we need to deal with in the future, and where the backlash is coming up? We need to involve men. Simply, we won't get anywhere if we don't involve men. We know that pictures, words, and phrases reproduce the way that we perceive normality and each other. And we are bombarded with them like never before, because social media and that is everywhere around us. And we don't even notice it. So gender stereotypes have become an even bigger part of our cultural backdrop. And we need to move on, and we need to include men in two ways. On the one hand, we have to acknowledge that men also face gender equality issues. And that's maybe controversial to say in this setting, but we do have to. Otherwise, we won't get them on board. So men have issues concerning, for instance, their right as carers and fathers. But we also see men as vulnerable groups. The bottom of society is often full of men. Homeless men, mentally ill men, suicides, that's often men. We have to deal with that. Why is that so? And we have data in Denmark that men are also victims of violence in the family. In Denmark, we see about 38,000 women, but at least 19,000 men victims of violence. So we have to take this very seriously and include men not only on the second leg, which is equally important, and which I'll come to now, namely as partners for women's empowerment. Also important, so for two reasons. Because we can't get any further if we don't include men in the fight for women's gender equality. And then I'd just like to just give you a quick, I don't think I have the time. Anyway, let me give you a couple of Danish best practice examples. We have realized the importance of including men as carers. So we have made a huge campaign to increase the number of male pedagogues in kindergartens. Not only for the sake of the children, to see men as role models, but also for the right to men to live out the need or the feeling that they want to be carers. So both for men and for the children as well. But we have also made a lot of campaigns on digital sexual harassment, where both girls and boys are victims of stereotypes. So in that sense, we made several campaigns on this in order to promote less stereotypical portraits online and on social medias. And on a global scale, what we've seen is, for instance, in Rwanda, I think it was, that they introduced in schools programs where they presented new or different ways of masculinity. And as a result, there's 40% less violence against partners 2 years later after this men care program. So masculinity, talking about that in a positive way, not only toxic masculinities, but also positive masculinities, is, I think, one of the really, really key elements that we need to deal with in the future if we want some change. A second important issue is the issue of LGBTI. There is a link. And what we see, and we need to talk about this openly. What I've experienced within the last 20 years is that the LGBTI issues have been raised. Great, extremely important. But quite often they're raised within the area of gender equality or the equality between men and women. And sometimes the phrasing and the way we talk about it gets confused. And what has happened in international negotiations is often that there is now a backlash because texts that we used to be able to talk about, like gender equality, gender stereotypes, are now being contested because it might mean LGBTI groups as well. So it is extremely important that we talk about what do we actually mean, because from our perspective and a Danish perspective, it's extremely important to include LGBTI issues. But it's also equally important that we don't lose the gains that we have achieved for women and men and the equality, and we lose that because we suddenly have a link that is difficult for people to understand. How do we progress this? So I really, really strongly encourage everybody to talk about these issues and talk about the language, not be shy away from this, but to talk about it and to promote both things. That would be my, yes, I'm looking at you. So the third questions, what are the barriers for achieving full equality? Well, I really, really want myself to be redundant. I don't want to work anymore. I don't want to stand here in 20 years and have my friends asking me, so now you worked there for 40 years and still nothing has happened? You think you should have a bonus this year? No. So another major problem and barrier is actually coming back a little bit to the backlash. We saw the wonderful, wonderful movement of the Me Too. I think that created an extra motivation and movement and even a cultural revolution. Fantastic. However, what we have to realize now, and that would be my final conclusion, is that we have to understand what is going on the net at the moment, because there's a kind of a backlash from this Me Too movement. We see it that there are the so-called incels online, where young men, well-educated, are kind of subtly being nudged into believing that suddenly all their privilege, suddenly they are being discriminated. It's sad for them. And I have two boys, two sons on 18 and 22. And they come in and they ask me and they say, Mom, I've read that this new director was appointed just because she was a woman. Isn't that a gender equality problem? That's really, really unfair. And I'm like, yeah, if the reason is that she was only appointed because she's a woman, then it would be unfair. But imagine all the other times where a man was appointed just because he was a man. You don't hear about that. But the stories online, they go like this. And I am honestly deeply, deeply worried about this trend. And I fear that if we don't approach this problem and take it up now, we will lose a whole generation of young men. Very, very important. So, yes, I've been told to finish up. Very depressing, actually, my speech ended up being. So I'll end on a good note. Well, we might not achieve full gender equality in Denmark, but we are quite close. And we have also been voted as the most happy country in the world. And I truly believe, and I often use this in negotiations, that if you do achieve a high level of gender equality, you will also promote coherence and well-being and democracy and economic growth. So yes, it's a win-win for all if we have gender equality. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kira. So we're going to do a bit of logistics now, because as I mentioned earlier, we're going to have a nice panel debate up here, and we're going to have their excellencies introduce our panelists. But I would like to invite my panelist up here now. So I'd like to see Greta Ferramo, that you met before, Mr. Stephen Fitzgerald, Dil Wickramasinghe, Hilda Tonne, and Mary Consolata Namagambe. Come up here, everybody. And have a seat. Okay, so these nice ladies and the gentlemen will each be giving us a speech, and then we'll have a panel debate. And obviously, a panel debate is always more interesting if you participate. So we encourage you to do so by putting your questions on Slido. You know the system called Slido, in which you can ask questions, and it will pop up here on the screens, and I'll have an iPad where I can check them out. If you don't have Slido on your phone, it's really easy to get from the App Store. And the code you should enter is #GenderDialogues. So you can do that while we have this little logistics movement here, because now I would like you to join me in a warm welcome again, because we will now welcome Her Excellency Mary Ellen Miller, who's the Ambassador of Australia to Denmark, who will be introducing our first of the 4 speakers, who is Stephen Fitzgerald. Welcome.
It was on before. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. I have to echo both Greta and Kira's comments about how pleased I am to see so many men in the room today. I mean, I think it's such good recognition that gender equality is not a women's issue. It's one where we all need to take responsibility and push and accelerate change. And we've talked very much like the exhortation to be impatient. I support that entirely. I think we're all in agreement that gender equality is an issue that goes to the heart of achieving the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So it's so important that we simply all need to step up together and create a more gender equal world. We know we can't afford to wait another. I had the ambitious target of 50 years, but I need to obviously say 108 years. We can't afford that. We need to have change happen now or very soon. So I'm delighted to be here to introduce Stephen. He's an Australian business leader, and he is going to speak to you about an Australian business innovation of which I'm particularly proud, the Male Champions of Change. This program was founded by Australia's former Sex Discrimination Commissioner, Elizabeth Broderick, and she recognised a little bit about what we've all been talking about right now, that if we really want to change the dynamic, we have to get men involved in the change, and we need decent, influential men to step up alongside women to make the change to the status quo. And Stephen is very well qualified to talk to you today about the importance and the potential for men to effect change in gender equality. He's had a very long and distinguished career in business, more than 30 years, including in roles such as Chairman of Goldman Sachs Australia, New Zealand, Head of Goldman Sachs Asset Management International, and many other board and executive roles. His current role is as co-founder and chairman of Affirmative Investment Management, the world's first dedicated green and impact bond fund management company. So he brings extensive experience to understand how business can respond to the challenge of gender equality and why it's in the interests of business to do so, and in the interests of all of us. Indeed, Stephen and Goldman Sachs Australia were founding members of the first Male Champions of Change group in Australia, and Stephen continues to act as an ambassador for the program from his base in London. So thank you very much, Stephen, for joining us, and we look forward to hearing your insights about the Male Champions of Change program.
Okay, I'll use this one. Thank you very much. I'm really pleased to be here in Copenhagen. It's only just over 24 hours since I left Sydney, but it's delightful to be here. And I'm really pleased to talk about the unfinished business around gender equality, particularly with a focus in Australia. The Male Champions of Change started almost a decade ago And as Mary Ellen said, it's all about men in power stepping up next to women to create a level playing field. And I'll talk a little bit about the initiatives that we have adopted over those 10 years. But first, a little context for Australia. Where have we come from, and are we making progress? Well, in certain areas we are. In the area of women on boards, we've seen a significant change. In 2008, only about 8% of boards were represented by women. Now, women on boards represent 29.7%, so almost 30%. Yet some other areas we've not seen progress. Women in executive roles in Australian companies, not as much progress. In the ASX 200, so the 200 largest listed companies in Australia, only 7% have a female CEO. And only 23% see females in senior executive roles in those 200 companies. So nowhere near the progress that we've seen in women on boards. People have already mentioned the gender pay gap. In Australia, a lifetime or working lifetime gender pay gap is around 700,000 Aussie dollars. Just to put it in context, that's about a house in Australia on average. 1 in 3 women in Australia report being sexually harassed in the last 5 years. So certainly unfinished business. Just some background on male champions. In Australia, I think the business case around the need for gender equality is broadly accepted. We have what I described in our organisation, Program Excellence. We had a program for everything in Goldman Sachs Australia and New Zealand. We've seen a shift in attitude as well. And Australia generally is a pretty inclusive place. So why haven't we seen the change that we thought we should see? Elizabeth Broderick, who was our Sex Discrimination Commissioner, asked that, and then had the realisation that actually, to really drive change, you needed men in power to step up next to women. Gender equality, the fight for gender equality, has historically been driven by women, for women, and much has been achieved. But as one of my fellow MCC members, Gordon Cairns, said, men invented the system, men largely run the system. We need to engage men to step up next to women to actually change the system. So Liz put in a few phone calls, and when Liz calls you, you generally say yes. She called 8 of us initially. CEOs of Australian companies that had been vocal about the need for gender equality, and particularly women in leadership. The CEO of the Commonwealth Bank of Australia, the largest bank, the CEO of our largest telco, Telstra, and the CEO of our national carrier, Qantas, and myself as CEO of Goldman Sachs Australia and New Zealand. We'd been vocal around the need for gender equality. We'd just produced an economic report looking at the potential uplift in Australia's GDP of increasing female participation in the workforce. And we saw that we had a potential 12% uplift in GDP by doing so. So Liz called us, and we formed what is still called the Male Champions of Change. There are now 27 in the founding group. That includes the Chief of the Australian Army, the Secretary of the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, University Vice-Chancellors. And yes, there are women, male champions of change. As leadership has changed in companies and organisations, women have stepped into those CEO roles and continued the initiatives. So Frances Adamson, the head of the Department of Foreign Affairs, is a male champion of change. We have quite a number of them. It's grown. There are now 200 MCC, so 27 in the founding group, but over 200 MCC members across Australia and internationally. There are now 10 groups, either industry-based or national-based. 2 international groups, including one in Pakistan. And just recently, the tech sector has formed a global group, which is really exciting, because they do have some issues around gender equality. What do we do in MCC? Well, we listen, predominantly to women, but we listen to everyone. We hopefully learn, and then we lead through practical action to disrupt the system. There are some rules. To be a member of our Male Champions of Change, you have to be a CEO or the chair of the company. No delegates are allowed. You have to appoint an advocate within your organization to drive the initiatives forward. Each group has a funded secretariat with permanent or part-time staff, which is really important. And our calendars are immovable. They're set 12 months in advance. They cannot be moved. And you can't have a delegate attend for you. When we first started, we sometimes got asked the question, why are you doing this? There's now a wait list of people, CEOs and chairs in Australia that want to be part of this. And the MCC advocacy has shaped Australia's national discussion on gender equality. As I said, we're all about practical change. We're all about having a go at something, seeing if it works. If it doesn't, we'll shut it down. If it works, we'll try and scale it up. So we test and then scale. There have been 15 or more initiatives that have been implemented in that time. And I'll just talk about, very briefly, about 4. Flexibility in the workplace. It's an enabler of gender equality. We had flexibility in our workplace, had great programs around it, but we didn't have very many people working in a flexible environment. It was about culture of an acceptance that flexible work doesn't mean you're working less hard. David Thodey, the CEO of Telstra, the largest telco, as I said, in Australia, on the way back from an MCC meeting, had a thought. He would change Telstra and their 50,000 plus employees that afternoon. And he sent an email saying, all roles in Telstra are flexible. If you want to advertise a role in Telstra that's inflexible, you have to have permission from a very senior person, his own group executive, and it has to have a health warning across it. This is an inflexible role. In an instant, he changed the culture from flexible working being unusual to flexible being the norm. The second I'll talk about is redefining merit. We are all about merit. We believe in merit, in hiring, in promoting and compensating people. But too many times we hid behind merit as a reason not to have equality in our workforce. Unconscious bias existed. I would promote someone that perhaps looked and sounded like me, because that's what an investment banker looks and sounds like, albeit sometimes taller. And we found that actually taking people from different backgrounds actually was really successful. And we had to just redefine what merit was. Asking the question when we saw a list of candidates, 50-50, if not, why not? Why weren't we seeing balance in the lists of candidates put in front of us? The third, which has been talked about a little bit already and has been a really important initiative for us last year and continuing in this year, is taking action on domestic violence as a workplace issue. 30% of women have experienced some form of physical or sexual violence from their intimate partner. 2 out of 3 of those women in Australia are in the workforce. Women and men that suffer physical or sexual violence is a workplace issue. Higher levels of absenteeism, productivity goes down. KPMG estimates that by 2021, domestic violence will cost the Australian workforce around $600 million a year. We needed to recognise that even in our companies, we would have both victims and perpetrators of domestic violence. It's not a socio-economic issue. It's a power issue. It's about one person imposing their power on another. And like so many things, what is right morally is also right economically. So we adopted a 3-level model for corporates of how to address domestic violence in their workforce. We sent that model to every Australian CEO, and we are implementing those in our own organisations. The final initiative, before I run out of time, was setting a standard around gender reporting. The stock exchange already had standards around gender reporting. voluntary standards. We didn't think they went far enough, so we worked with the ASX to set a higher standard for gender reporting. Reporting not only at the overall firm and CEO level, but CEO minus 1, 2, and 3, the senior executive levels in the firm. We all report on that. And we're competitive. You know, none of us want to be at the bottom of the list in terms of improvement each year, and that helps as well. So setting a different standard on gender reporting. Transparency is a really important thing. In conclusion, much has been achieved, but much more needs to be achieved. Men need to step up next to women. That's what Male Champions of Change is all about. And the one thing that I don't think we make enough about is all of the initiatives, that 15 plus initiatives that we've implemented over the last 10 years, none of them have been to the sole benefit of women. They've benefited men and women. To me, it's about creating the workforce for the future and future-proofing your own organisation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. And now for the introduction of journalist, blogger, and change advocate Dil Wickramasinghe. Please join me in a warm welcome to Her Excellency Cleona Manahan, Ambassador of Ireland to Denmark.
Hello, everybody. And because I'm looking at Patricia, I feel the power of those buttons. We're going to pick up a little speed here. This afternoon's dialogue came about because of passion from the few of us that have really spent many, many years, I think, talking about this, but also about the frustration and to imagine the possible. It seems that we're not restricted in any way, as I look around this room, to the talent all the way back, because I started in those back rows, and I know that that is where the change is going to come from. Yes, the Secretary-General has addressed every one of us. He was in Geneva this week, and he told us that the doors of economic opportunity will remain closed. I don't think we're talking about a glass ceiling. I personally feel it's titanium. We don't want to forget that gender equality is a question of power, but if we're going to make this change, we need everybody on board, men, women, all the regions, and you're all here today. Please stay with this. I don't know why I'm saying these things 3 decades after I started. So I really feel, Ciara, we need to pick up some speed here. We know about how long it's going to take. I have a daughter, I have a son. I don't want to wait for my great-great-great-grandchildren. I won't be around. I want it for now, and I know we can get there. Irish Aid yesterday released a fantastic new policy where finally we really have realigned gender equality, climate action, combating all of these things, good governance and poverty. The focus has to be on women and girls because we know it's key in every partnership and intervention. So can you imagine the honour for me today to look over at Dil, and that Dil chose to come to Ireland. She's going to share her story with you, but what she's probably going to be too modest to say is what she has done for us in Ireland over 19 years. Not wanting to compromise her identity, she found herself coming to Ireland, and very fortunately for us, she stayed. She has become established as an absolutely renowned, award-winning mental health journalist, a social justice champion. And with her lovely wife, Anne-Marie, and their family, they have co-founded an Inside Matters, which is a mental health service which has now assisted and supported thousands of people. In 2014, she was awarded the Frederick Douglass Civic Award for her outstanding contribution and her leadership and that combative energy in gender equality and working with the grassroots has helped us through our recent referenda on marriage equality and repeal the 8th, and in publicly calling out sexism at great personal cost in the workplace. Dil is a champion for the rights of more people in Ireland than ever before, and acceptance, equality and inclusion is what this is all about. I grew up in very different times in Ireland. I didn't think I would be standing in front of you to tell you we are making progress. We've a lot more to do. So I'm going to hand over, but before I do, I want to encourage absolutely every single person in this room to make this commitment. The gender dialogue isn't about the people on the podium, it's about everybody in the room and everybody else outside. I'm delighted that UNOPS is going to share this message, and even though this is my nearly last period in my time in wonderful Denmark, I'm not taking my eyes off this. I will stay in contact. Every boy, every girl, every woman, every man has to speak up. Local debate is, we know in Ireland, the pathway. More women have to do it, and more men have to stand right there with them. Become involved at your local level. If you're not, find a way to. Get letters out to editors. Chackle the radio, get on the phone-ins, participate in local, national and European elections. Politics needs more women. Politics needs more young women. Be inspired when you listen to Dill. Thank you.
What a wonderful introduction. Thank you so much, Clina. So, good afternoon, everybody. It's delightful to be here at UN City. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Clina Manahan, the Irish ambassador to Denmark, for inviting me to speak here today and for giving me my first night of uninterrupted sleep in nearly 4 years, because I have a 3.5-year-old and 18-month-old daughter at home. Look at me, I'm wearing clean clothes and I don't have porridge in my hair. It's amazing, amazing, amazing. So, my full name is Mehindikula Surya Nancy Leah Dilhani Vikramasinghe. That's not my address, that's not my life story, that's my actual name. And whenever I'm asked to talk about gender equality, I'm compelled to actually start by sharing the story of my mother first, because it really shows just how far we've come and how much more work there is left to be done. My mother was born in Sri Lanka in 1934, in a village not too far from Colombo. And sadly, as it is the custom in many Asian countries, she was forced into a marriage at the age of 17, ironically to a man who worked for the UN, based in Rome. It's just really interesting that I'm here talking about this. After a while, after the wedding, they jetted off to Rome, and after a while they had a daughter, and soon the cracks in the marriage began to show. And she rang her parents, my grandparents, complaining, saying that she was not happy, and she was told immediately that if she was to divorce this man, she would be completely cut off by the family and disowned. The couple decided to go their separate ways after a number of years, and my mother found herself in Italy, a single parent, without an education and without a family to support her. Fearlessly, she embarked in a career as a fashion model, and then became a designer, and then became a very successful entrepreneur and ran her own chain of high fashion boutiques in Italy. So she was doing very well, but at some stage, she began to crave the acceptance of her family, crave for that love that she lost, and crave for that approval of her parents. And she met my father, and I think and she married him, and I think it was all to try and reclaim that approval that she lost. So I was born in Rome, and I lived there till the age of 12. And at the start, I was raised to believe that women were equal to men, and that we had the right to decide what we want to do with our life. That's how I was raised at the start. But tragically, when her second marriage began to crumble, in a last-ditch attempt to, I suppose, get some validation, a sense of self-worth, a sense of belonging, she became overnight a Jehovah's Witness. And this was devastating, because it had a huge impact on the family, and of course it had a huge impact between her and my relationship. And of course, the concept of equality was abandoned when she was faced with an independent, strong-willed lesbian daughter, and it fractured our relationship, and it led to history repeating itself, because at the age of 17, they asked me to leave the family home. So by this stage, I was living in Sri Lanka, and I found it incredibly hard because even though Sri Lanka had the first female prime minister in the world, Sirimava Bandaranaike, equality and human rights are yet to be cherished in Sri Lankan society. Homosexuality is yet to be decriminalized. The social caste system remains unchallenged. Women suffer unspeakable acts of sexual violence, and freedom of speech is still a huge issue. I was fired from my first job in Sri Lankan radio for wanting to be open about my sexuality. And like so many thousands of LGBT people from around the world, I was forced to emigrate in the search of a country where I could be my true self. At the age of 21, I immigrated to Bahrain, where I worked as a flight attendant for 5 years. In case of an emergency exits are over there and over there. I always have to make the joke when I say that. And I remember that contract that I signed so quickly at the age of 21, which said, if I got married, I couldn't get married for the first 5 years of service, and if I became pregnant, it meant instant dismissal. I was like, okay, right, I still want to get out of Sri Lanka, so I'll sign anything at this stage. And then, thankfully, after 5 years, I immigrated to Ireland in June 2000. I was 25 years old, and I'll never forget that first day in Dublin, because my arrival in Ireland, 24 hours after my feet touched Irish soil, my arrival coincided with Dublin Gay Pride, and I found myself dancing down O'Connell Street, which is the main street in Dublin, singing "It's Raining Men," which is very, very ironic. I know. But that first day sparked this activism in me, and it really prompted me to do whatever I could as an activist and be part of countless campaigns in Ireland to improve this amazing country that I absolutely adore and I'm proud to call home. Like many migrants, I started in hospitality, and then I carved myself a successful career in actually recruitment. But in 2006, I became very unhappy and very depressed, and like my mother, I was craving for that acceptance and validation from my family, and also I had experienced sexual abuse as a child, and that began to haunt me. So I reached for support, and I walked into the office of a psychotherapist, and from there I went from strength to strength, because I reclaimed my career as a journalist. I presented an award-winning social justice and mental health program on a national radio station. I met an amazing woman, Anne-Marie. We set up Insight Matters. We have 2 centers. We have 50 psychotherapists who work with us, and we provide the support for over 400 clients per week. And then we got married, and I gave birth to my son in the week of the marriage referendum. Our first outing as a family was to actually vote for the marriage referendum. Can you imagine how emotional that was for everybody there? And then Anne-Marie gave birth to our daughter Xavier just 18 months ago. And coincidentally, this is very funny, we use the services of Cryos International. So we may be coming back here when our children turn 18 to maybe shake the hand of the kind Danish man that helped our family. I think it's just so interesting that I'm here. Yeah, are you here? Are you here? You know, it's like I'm looking at all the men. Do you look like my son and daughter? It's just very funny. I had to share that with you. I remember holding my daughter Xavier and thinking how blessed I felt in my personal and professional life, and I really didn't think I could be any happier. And then September 2017, a high-profile presenter in my own radio station made appalling rape victim-blaming comments on air. And as a woman and as a survivor of sexual abuse, I was triggered, and I was mindful of other survivors who were triggered by the same comments, and I felt I really could not stay silent. I remember holding my daughter in my arms. She was 4 weeks old, and thinking, I have to do this, not just for me, I have to do this for her. And just 2 weeks later, my decade-long program, Global Village, was cancelled abruptly due to scheduling changes. Just to recap, the man who made the disgusting comments about rape was suspended temporarily and kept his job, but the woman who spoke out lost her job. Shockingly, no other station will hire me, as I'm now branded a troublemaker for speaking up. And I'm very proud to be a troublemaker, can I just say. But here I am, maybe a bit shaky, but still standing, proud of myself because I spoke up, and I know my story inspired so many others to come forward as part of the global Me Too campaign. I took 2018 out because I wanted to kind of figure out what I wanted to do with myself, and my mental health took an absolute nosedive, and I found myself back again in the psychotherapist's office. And And I realized I want to take a break from media and focus in my interests on mental health. I've returned to university and now I'm training to be a psychotherapist and counselor. And I know just how much my life has changed when I decided to take that journey into my very soul, and look forward to the day when I will sit in that therapist chair and help my clients to do the same, and experience for themselves just how transformational that journey can be. And transformation must happen internally and externally if you want to see real, lasting change when it comes to gender equality. Speaking of external change, Ireland has had phenomenal social change in the last few years, with the marriage equality for same-sex couples, then repealing the Irish constitutional prohibition on abortion, 2 massively historic referendums. So external change led by internal reflection, so to speak. And yes, we are very hopeful, but gender inequality still exists in Ireland, and it ranges from the obvious to the subtle. One only has to take a look at the number of women in boardrooms, academia, science, media, politics. Across the board, we still have a long way to go. Just last year, Ireland celebrated the centenary of women being able to vote, but the Irish constitution still contains the following wording. In particular, the state recognizes that that by her life within the home, woman gives to the state a support without which the common good cannot be achieved. The state shall therefore endeavour to ensure that mothers shall not be obliged by economic necessity to engage in labour to the neglect of their duties in the home. So this is currently in our Irish constitution. And of course, it's a reflection of the 1930s Catholic Ireland. But in 2019, this is absolutely unacceptable that this language is still there. So this, of course, this conversation about gender equality is not just about equal opportunity to work for equal pay, but more urgently, it's about equal opportunity to feel safe. And domestic violence is still an alarming issue in Ireland, as it is in so many other European countries. According to the Femicide Watch report of 2018, since records began in 1996, 225 women have died violently, with 16 children being killed alongside their mothers. The vast majority of the women murdered in Ireland are killed by a man they know. Over half of the women were killed by their current or former partner, and 61% of women were killed in their own homes. This is shocking statistics, and I'm very conscious that these are people that we're talking about. Ireland currently had the cervical smear scandal, where 221 cervical cancer patients, of which 20 of whom have died, could have benefited from earlier treatment. Birth is another issue that I could talk for hours on, but I won't. In Ireland, if a woman dies during childbirth, there isn't an automatic inquest. It's up to the bereaved family to put pressure on the authorities to investigate what happened to this woman. So there's systematic failures to listen to the needs of the woman. Both my wife and I opted to have home births. I actually had my home birth filmed, and it was featured in a documentary and televised. I'm so looking forward to showing it at my son's 21st birthday. I'm sure he's going to love me for that, yeah? But back to women and living and working to their full potential, we all know that there is a glass ceiling. I used to think that there is just one ceiling for all, but ultimately more women push against it, it'll shatter. However, after living in Ireland for 19 years, I've discovered that there are many types of ceilings of various height and thickness, single, double, triple glazed, and so forth, right? And the ceiling very much depends on your social status, on your ethnicity, on your sexuality, on your gender identity, whether you identify as cisgender, non-binary, or transgender. Thank you, Kira, for your speech. That was fantastic. And you know, even how you look like. You know, as a lesbian migrant woman who likes to shop in the men's section and sports short hair, I know I have to work 3 times or 4 times as hard to achieve success or to get any recognition for my work. So how can we solve the issue? The million-dollar question. I believe that the only way we can create an equal society where women are empowered, independent, and enjoy equal rights is by making a concerted effort to change in self and society, internally and externally. As women, we must look deep within and embrace ourselves fully, just as we are, without the makeup, the anti-aging cream, the high heels, and the crash diets. Exactly as we are. And this may mean going against everything we've been told, even by our own mothers. Believe me, being the daughter of a fashion model, it wasn't easy for me to accept myself exactly as I am. Men need to see equality for women not as a threat, to echo the other speakers, but as beneficial and liberating for them. Boys and men should not feel the social pressure to always be strong, hard, and not express their feelings. In Europe, 8 out of 10 suicides are men. Gender inequality is harmful for all. And externally, we of course need to continue create structures, policies, quotas, initiatives like today to address gender inequality and keep it very much at the top of the agenda. So in conclusion, I would like to return to my own mother's story. Despite our differences, she was a phenomenal role model for me, and I know I'm going to do my best to be a strong role model for my daughter and my son, because they're going to be raised as feminists, whether they like it or not. Because isn't this what it's all about? Isn't this what it's all about? You know, leaving this world a little bit better than how we found it. And so our children can enjoy it, and then they can pay it forward to the next generation. That's what it's all about. Thank you very much for listening to me, and it was an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
I think I can speak for all of us when I say, please keep making trouble. Next, for the introduction of Mrs. Hilde Tonne, please join me in welcoming Her Excellency Aud Kolberg, who is the Ambassador of Norway to Denmark.
Now it works? Yes. Thank you. In Norway, we have an expression from ski jumping, calling jumping after Wirkola. And I feel that a little bit now because I am many things, but I am definitely not a stand-up comedian. So it's it's a bit ungrateful to come after you, Odile, but it was wonderful to listen to you. Dear friends, colleagues, and guests, compared to many other regions, the Nordics have achieved a fairly high level of gender equality. But I think it's a danger for us to believe that we are and have achieved gender equality as a society, because also we have plenty of unfinished business to do. One important part of our unfinished business is the persistent challenge of reaching a higher share of women in top management positions in our business and private sector. I am therefore very pleased to introduce our next speaker, Hilde Tonne. She has worked as a leader in innovation and digitalization in both Norway and Denmark, and is today Chief Innovation Officer in the Ramboll Group. She is also the chairman of the Norwegian Research Council, and has held several board positions in the business sector. I would also like to mention that she has contributed to a book that will be out in a few days, I think, called, if I translate this into English, Because It Is Worth It, Women's Way to the Top of the Business Sector. And the whole point of that book is to tell the stories of 8 female executive or female managers in operative executive position in the Norwegian business sector, and discussing what is it that makes it so hard for reaching a higher level. So please welcome Hilde Tonne.
Thank you very much, Aud, and thank you everyone for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to talk about business. And yes, the Nordics are advanced, but I can assure you we have plenty of unfinished business in business. And there's no difference between the status of the Nordics and what you tell about Australia, and what you tell about Ireland, and what you tell about Sri Lanka even, with respect to executives in top management positions, and even on board representation. And why is it that? Why do we have that challenge? A little bit about my own background. I'm an engineer, And just by saying that, I feel lonely. I've been in Norwegian and international business for 30 years. And when I traveled, I remember I was around 30 years old. When I traveled with my colleagues to conferences and participating in engineering, techie stuff in the oil and gas business, first 17 years of my career, I always had to kind of look blank when we met strangers who said to my colleagues that I was traveling with, "And how's your wife doing?" That was a starting point. I was always the only one. And that has actually continued until maybe the last few years. So being in technology, being in change and big corporates for the whole part of my career, I have experienced a lot of great opportunities, but I've also experienced the strangeness of being different. And I made some points that I would like to share with you. First of all, the world now is really moving quickly, where technology is pushing change for everyone, not only in business, but in our everyday life. And one of the main challenges business is presented with is the war for talents. And let me give you the following numbers. Norway and Denmark, approximately 5 million people. Half of that, which are men, 2.5 million. If you take 12.5% that represents men between 50 and 59, you're down to 300,000. 20% of those have higher education. And then you take out the people with the men with turbans and brown skin and the different ones, you're left with approximately 40,000 people that are supposed to be the talents of a small country. You think that's going to work? That's not going to work. Sorry for the message to the white male 50 plus in the room. That is not going to work. You're not going to save the world. And I'm not either. I'm more than 50. So what we need to do, we need to embrace everyone when we look for the best talents. As business leaders, as male business leaders and female business leaders, in order to find the best talents, we need diversity. We need the women. We need the brown skin ones. We need people with hijab and turban. And we need people non-speaking Scandinavians. We need to open up. So that's my first point. My second point is quotas and target setting. And quotas and target setting, I'm from Norway. We have a 40% quota for either one gender in the stock-listed companies in Norway. And it's been a huge discussion for ages. I fully support it. And do you know why I support it? Otherwise, nothing would have happened. And another reason I support it, and that's the main one, and it was mentioned by Kira before today. The ones that have been quoted for 1,000 years, that's the men. They've been quoted because they did not have any competition unless we had the quotas. And I'm on the board of Danske Bank here in Denmark. And let's just for a second not think about scandals. Danske Bank is a great company. I've been on the board for 3 years. And it's a lot of competent people in that company. And we had some great discussions on that board under great leadership. And we started discussing KPIs for the CEOs in beginning of 2017. What would the percentage of women on Expo be in 2020? What was proposed was 12.5%. And that's the one time I felt I was an activist. I pushed the no button on the voting. You can do that electronically. And after that, we just stopped the discussion, and we always had great discussions on the board. Now it's 25%, and it will move. That's a target, not the result yet. I also have another story there. I'm on the group executive board of Ramble Group, as Aud was saying. And I was one of the 2 first women starting 1st of 1st, 2018, after 73 years on the group executive board last year. And I'm pretty sure, I haven't kind of dug into it, but I'm pretty sure my great boss, Jens Peter Sau, was nudged with targets from his board. I'm absolutely sure, I know it's true. So targets are working, and we need them. Then, unconscious bias. That's my third point. Unconscious bias is extremely important. If you're an engineer, 26-year-old, and people think you're the mistress or the secretary or someone who is not part of the conversation, and that goes on for many, many years, you get kind of fed up with it. And I can understand when you are to hire someone in top management positions, that is a risky thing to do. You want to hire the right one. So yes, the risk level is there. You want to safe it. But what's really happening is that you're safing it by hiring someone that looks like yourself. Looks like yourself. I've been in so many discussions on group executive boards, on boards, non-executive boards, where people are kind of forgetting themselves saying, but can she take this on? She has children. In the Nordics, I'm telling you. Can she really do this? Because she seems a bit flustered. She has this high-pitched sound and she gets extremely emotional when you discuss with her. Yeah, and then they talk to me. So these discussions are terrible. And I have one story. I used to be leading out 3 countries in Asia for the Telenor Group when I was on the group executive board there. Pakistan, Bangladesh, Thailand, and Malaysia. I was the chairman or member of the board of those different boards we had there, and I was traveling all the time. I experienced something I never experienced in the Nordics. When I was the leader, they listened to me. The hierarchy was working. The rules were set. They didn't care if I was a woman. When chairwoman, Madam Chairwoman, that's what they called me in Pakistan. When Madam Chairwoman arrived in Islamabad, nobody did politics. Nobody had subtle notes or discussions except for focusing on the business. That was actually a quite good feeling. Of course, there are other things that are good with flat structures and all of that. I get that. But sometimes clarity actually helps. And it is about biases. It's extremely difficult to get to the top in Pakistan. And it's about glass ceilings that was mentioned by you as well for different kinds of people. But the glass ceiling is there because of the biases. And we have to break through it. And we have to create critical mass in order for people to not have those biases. And then I would like to end by talking about leaning in. And this is a bit Nordic. My experience in the Nordics is that, yes, we have great solutions for maternity leaves. We have great focus on life-work balance. And that's great. But top management is very hard work. And you cannot have maternity leaves 2 years, 2 years, 2 years and expect that that's going to be a career. That's one thing I want to say. And I'm thinking, to a certain extent, if we're not sharing more of that burden of having or opportunity of having children with our partners and men, nothing's going to happen. It's extremely important. And then I'm thinking also, what is this thing about, I hear a lot, women don't really want to get into top management positions. That confuses me. That really confuses. I always wanted to be part of deciding something. And my daughters, I have 2 daughters, one 18 and one 22. They want to be part of deciding something. So what's happening here? Okay, maybe the boys are a bit more forward-leaning and the girls are a bit more thinking about it, but that can't be a reason. But it does take to lean in. It does take to raise your hand. And it does take to acknowledge that a girl can be bossy. I've been bossy my whole life, and I've been told, oh, you're too bossy. If I was a man, nobody would have said anything. But I'm extremely bossy as a woman, I can admit to that. But you have to, if you talk to your sons and daughters, if you coach people, if you're leaders in business or elsewhere, if you're parents, we have to start talking about leaning in is okay. Ban bossy. Sheryl Sandberg in Facebook says this. I think it's extremely important. So lean in, take position, and grasp the opportunity because it's actually worth it. It's a lot of fun to go into business, be part of shaping the world through business. And I'm absolutely sure that we're on our way, but I'm afraid we still have to say that the Nordics are not leading in any way in the unfinished business of business in our countries. Thank you so much.
And finally, for our fourth speech, to introduce founder and CEO at She4She, Mary Consolata Namgambe, please welcome Her Excellency Sinsizwa Mandela, who is the Ambassador of South Africa to Denmark.
Thank you so much, and thank you for this wonderful opportunity, Patricia, and you as well, Mary Ellen, Cleona, for us to have dialogues and spaces for expression as women. Now, when I first met our next speaker, Mary Consolata, it was at a Mandela Day event a few years ago. And this event was organized by a youth network council to do with human rights. And she stood up to speak. And she had a pretty sad and shocking story to tell. Apparently, there'd been a very popular radio program here in Denmark that encouraged what they referred to as typical Danish humor, that you could be as offensive as you wanted, you could push the boundaries, all in the name of humor. And tragically, the slant was racist. And Mary Consolata took it upon herself to fight this program and to fight this developing culture. She was subjected to humiliation, to bullying, sometimes physical abuse, and she literally fought alone in the wilderness. Now there we were, not only as ambassadors in Denmark, but also as revolutionaries, women who fought for change, but we were unaware of a battle that she was involved in for change. But somehow this did not deter her. She remained strong. In the words of Maya Angelou, still I rise. She went back to Uganda to start the She4She program. This is a program that focuses on how a simple biological cycle like menstruation can affect the progress of girl children in schools and the potential of young Black women to be active in society. She has started this project of manufacturing and producing reusable sanitary ware, and this project has gone not just beyond, it's not just in Uganda, but has gone beyond to Tanzania, to Kenya, to Guinea-Conakry. And she's also hoping to embark on other initiatives focused on women and children, also including men, in terms of like building community centers and making sure that the men participate in construction, in plumbing, and so on and so forth, so that they feel like they're part of the process of creating a better life for the women. Now, we spoke earlier about how important it is for us not just to confine these dialogues in these spaces, that we have to take this conversation beyond. And I believe it has to be a very important part of our lives. It has to be a lifestyle. It has to be something we do on a daily basis. And I can say for myself as a mother, as a grandmother, it's also about the bedtime stories that we choose to read to our children. That's where the culture, that's where the mindset is developed. These gender dialogues must be taken to schools, must form part of the school curriculum. The way in which women see themselves, girl children see themselves, the way in which boy children see themselves and how they relate to the children, it's got to be part of that. Popular culture is what educates these children today. Where are our voices? We have to do this. We have to be involved in detention centers. We have to be involved in community projects on the ground. We have to make sure that our voices are not silenced beyond here. And it has to be something that we're not afraid constantly in whatever space to remind ourselves that we are champions for this greater cause of gender dialogues and for the empowerment of women. Thank you.
I'm going to get my speech. I'm going to get my speech. My speech. Sorry. Hello, everyone. It's such a great honor to be introduced by a woman that I greatly admire. And it's such a privilege to be here with you today to share my thoughts and my passion. I would like to begin with my story. Louisa had it, Dida had it, Penel had it. I also wanted it. I wanted it so badly. Everyone was talking about it. Our teacher had just taught about it. I was longing for it. I was longing for the day that I would become a woman. I was longing for the day that I would have my first period. And finally, when I was 15, it arrived. It arrived while I was sleeping. I ran across the hallway and I told my mom. She gave me a packet of pads and told me that I was a woman now. At this time, I didn't know my privilege. I didn't know that I was one of the lucky ones. I didn't know that having a pad was a privilege. I didn't know that being educated about my body was a privilege. Namaganda is sitting in her classroom. She's sitting in her last class of the day. She begins feeling something wet in her underwear. She thinks for herself, am I peeing on my uniform? She slowly removes herself from her classroom and goes to the bathroom and looks in her underwear. And there's blood everywhere. Namaganda panics. What is happening to her? Why is she bleeding? What did she do wrong? She begins crying. No one had ever told Namaganda that one day she will become a woman. No one had ever told Namaganda that one day she will get her period. When the bell rings, Namaganda runs to her classroom and gets her things and runs home and lies in bed. When her mother asks her what she's doing in her bed in the middle of the day, she lies to her because she doesn't want to worry her. She tells her that her stomach is hurting. She lays in bed for 4 days until the blood stops. Namaganda doesn't know that this is going to happen every month until she reaches her menopause. Namaganda doesn't know that because she's a woman now, she's going to miss out on 4 school days every month because her parents can't afford to buy her menstrual protection. When Namundu got her first period, she was afraid. She was afraid that she was dying. Terrified, she stuffed bits of mattress inside herself to stop the bleeding. Too scared to tell her parents what was happening to her, she kept quiet. Namundu doesn't know that this emotional stress she has around her period is going to define how she performs in school. That she's going to become 1 in 10 girls in sub-Saharan Africa that misses school during her period. Namundu doesn't know that her grades might decline, and therefore it will become harder for her to become the woman she wants to be, and that it will become harder for her to fulfill her full potential. The only difference between me, Namaganda, and Namundu is that we got our periods on 2 different continents. Having our periods on 2 different continents will define if a girl has access to menstrual products, if a girl has access to menstrual education. This will also define the shame she will face regarding her menstruation. Upon hearing Namaganda and Namundu's story, I cried of my privilege. I cried of my privilege of having school toilets with running water. A school toilet where the doors can be locked and I could privately change my pads. And afterwards wash my bloody hands privately and not under a public tap in a schoolyard. I cried of my privilege that the only time I ever stressed about my period was when I was on holiday and I wanted to swim, but my uterus decided otherwise. I cried of my privilege of buying a packet of 8 pads for $4 in my second home in Denmark, when in Uganda, girls like Namaganda and Namundu live on less than $1 per day, but at the same time, that is the same price for a packet of 8 menstrual pads in Kampala. To put this in perspective, I would have to pay $50 for 8 pads in Denmark, as I spend almost $50 a day here. I cried of my privilege that as a woman, I will be bleeding for almost 8 years in my lifetime, but I will never, never lack a pad. I cried of my privilege. Knock, knock. I knocked on my brother's door and he opened. We were going to hang out, just me and him. As soon as I stepped inside, he tells me out of the blue that he and his fiancée are having a baby, and I was going to become a senga, an aunt. I was overjoyed, a new life, a new soul to our family. We had a baby shower for my sister-in-law, celebrating this new life that she was carrying, celebrating her for carrying this miracle. One of the things that have to be in place for us to produce babies is menstruation. So my question is, why don't we celebrate menstruation as we celebrate pregnancies? For 1 second, close your eyes and imagine a world whereby we celebrate menstruation as much as we celebrate pregnancies. That we give as much respect and attention to menstruating girls. That we welcome their womanhood with a party, a menstruation party, where friends and family are invited to this life-changing moment, where mothers, sisters, grandmothers share their menstruation stories, the funny moments, the painful moments, the bloody moments. A party where men and boys also are invited to listen and to learn. What would this do? How would this change the way we view menstruation? How would this affect the shame that 900 million women around the world deal with when having their menstruation? Will we as women still hide our menstrual protection when going to the toilet? Will we as women still whisper to one another, "I have my period"? Will we as women still feel unclean when we have our period? Will girls like Namaganda and Namundu still be surprised, shocked, and even cry about something as natural as menstruation? Or would this new tradition embrace what we truly are, women that bleeds? I held a workshop on menstrual hygiene, and this little girl came up to me and asked me, "Why am I a girl? I hate being a girl. There's so much I have to deal with that my brothers never have to deal with. I hate being a girl," she repeated. This moment I had with her stuck with me. These words, "I hate being a girl," have been haunting me, because the only reason she hated being a girl was because she was tired of finding solutions to her menstruation. Every month, she had to find an old t-shirt, old books, leaves as menstruation protection. But at the same time, she saw organizations coming to her community, handing out free condoms, as if sex wasn't a choice and menstruation was. Around last year at a conference in London, over $300 million were given from Western countries such as Denmark to help poor women in the global south to get contraception to manage their reproductive health. But imagine a young lady going to the market And at the market, she meets an organization that gives her free condoms. She gets home to her husband. Her husband provides everything for her, from the underwear she's wearing to the food she eats. She dropped out of school because her parents couldn't afford to buy menstrual protection for her, and she couldn't deal with the shame. She suggests to her husband that maybe they should begin using condoms, as they already have 3 kids and they don't have enough resources. Her husband looks at her and says no, and asks her, why would I eat candy with plastic wrapped around it? The woman quickly puts away the condoms and goes back to the kitchen. As much as we all want women to be independent and own their own bodies, providing condoms to women that are economically dependent on a man for everything is not going to empower women to own their own bodies. Keeping girls in school is going to empower girls, empower their voices, and empower the choices they choose for their bodies. So let me ask you again, why do we give free condoms and not free pads? From the countries I have worked in, from Uganda to Kenya to Tanzania to Gambia to Senegal to Guinea, menstruation is holding girls back so they can't fulfill their purpose for their generation. Imagine if the cure of cancer is in the brain of a girl that cannot afford menstrual protection, so she drops out of school. So before I go, I want to leave you with these questions. How can something as natural as menstruation keep girls away from school? How can something as natural as menstruation be so shameful? How can something as natural as menstruation make a girl hate herself for being a girl? We can do better. You can do better. Let's make this world a better place for menstruating women. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you. Having listened to these great and inspiring speeches, I can't help but wonder, and I know this is an enormous question, but why on earth is this still unfinished business? Why on earth is it so? We have all these great people working for gender equality, and we have been for years and years and decades, at least in great parts of the world. Why is it still unfinished business? Great Tifa Rahman, why are we still talking about this?
Yeah, if I had a good enough question, we would probably not answer to that question. We would probably not be in that position. So I think the answer is complex. One of the things is, of course, circling around power. Who owns, who are the strongest, who owns the capital, who are on top of what is needed for production. I remember the shock when I read for the first time the report from UNDP about women holding only 3% of the capital. Mm-hmm. I think it's really important to look at the sort of structural changes that are needed, but not only that, also what we can do step by step. So that is why I'm now sitting here quite happy to hear the different stories, because it's demonstrating actually that this is complex, but if we do things together, I think we can also work to improve the situation. We do that in UNOPS. We implement 1,000 projects every year, and when we now actually adopted a gender balance strategy, means that we are about 11,000 personnel who would then know that from the project conception, design, planning, implementation, we need to be gender aware, not as gender blind as we may have been before. So the projects we do will actually have that in mind from the start. I think that matters when we build a school, when we build a road, a health clinic. So not forget about how we can also do things that makes a change, makes a difference in our small ways around the world as well.
You say it's about power. Now, rarely is power handed over voluntarily. How do we push for that power? How do we go about that? I mean, you have with your organization actually, given power away, or you're encouraging men to give power over to women. But how do we give that power over to women?
In my organization, I don't think we gave power to anyone. I think what we were focused on is what's going to make the most successful organization and commercial success. And that comes from diversity, but diversity of thought. And I think that's the important thing. Gender is just one lens on diversity of thought. It's so many other things. It's ethnicity, it's sexual orientation, it's background. And if you believe in diversity of thought as an enabler of a successful business, it just makes sense. So we started, when we started my business, we started with an objective of having diversity of thought. And it turns out that we've ended up being ethnically diverse. We're gender balanced at all levels, management committee, partner, and overall, which is unusual for a financial services firm. But it all came from wanting to create a really successful business. And now we don't talk about it because, as someone said, critical mass, once you're there, it just self-reinforces.
So having started a new business,
much easier.
Much easier.
Yeah, I think
because you're free of traditional thinking.
Yeah, you don't
bias.
have that. Legacy and tradition are really good things as well. Culture is a really good thing. Culture, I think, is one of the most difficult things to change, and it's culture, I think, which holds us back. But when you start a new organization, you actually get to decide what your culture is going to be. And then everything you say, do, and prioritize after that either reinforces it or takes away from it. But you get to make a decision. Much harder to retrofit culture. And that's why I think it's taking longer than it should.
What have you done on a concrete level? Do you have tangible goals? Do you have rules about who to hire, or
no?
What have you done?
Don't. We want to have diversity of thought.
That's it.
That's it. And it's turned out that and the first few hires were gender balanced, and after that, we really. It's not something we think about every day, but it turns out that we have gender balance at every level. But it's also background. We like to have people with different backgrounds. So we just hired a young professional football player who's got a great physics degree but no financial services background. He brings a different element to what we're doing. And thankfully realized at the age of 23 he wasn't making the major league rather than 33. It's always a good thing.
So it seems like both morally and economically, obviously, gender equality pays off, yet it seems that the power is still being held on to. How do we change that?
Well, I actually think that diversity of thought is coming after it's been nudged a little bit. I'm pretty sure it's not going to happen by talking about it, or we see that it's not happening by talking about it.
You say nudged. What does that mean?
Pardon?
You say nudged. What does
Nudged.
that mean?
Target setting. Quotas to a certain extent on non-executive level, as I've seen myself. I never felt quoted myself, but I know, you have to make a couple of rules to kickstart things, because I believe the same as Grete is saying. This is to a certain extent a power game. Part of it is. Yeah. Someone will be preserving, someone will be stopping, someone will be creating inertia in change, whether it's gender balance, whether it's other change. And this is a huge change. And you need the critical mass in order to kind of tip it in the right direction. And in order to kickstart it, you will need couple of rules, target setting, and some driving. And I think we need more of that before we see it getting in the right balance. I'm absolutely sure we need more of that. I've seen it for 30 years, not happening. And but then I fully agree with you, and I think what your minister did, was that's a huge nudging. Yeah. The MCC, I want to bring that to Norway. And I think it's a great driving force that you've been doing in Australia. I think it's typical nudging.
Do you see this as a question of power, essentially?
Yeah, and it's really interesting because I think when we talk about gender equality, kind of echo what Hilda was saying. I think there is an element of, there's a group, men think, oh, I have to give up something here. I have to. Gender equality for women means men. I have to lose something, and the reality is that's not the case. And it's trying to explain it. Recently, I heard someone explain it to me, like, in the context of feminism, what does it mean? What does gender equality mean? It's like, it's basic. It's a right like a right to water. If a man is thirsty and a woman is thirsty, are you telling me the man should get the water first and the woman? No, there's water for everybody, so everybody should get that, So, but it's that, and again, because I mentioned feminism, that still has such a misconception, because people think if you're a feminist, you're a man-hating lesbian for some reason, No, we just want equality, but it's just kind of really, and again, talking about mental health and how men, and I feel the pressure being put on my son to play a certain way, to very much what Kira was saying earlier on about trying to, I feel this pressure for him to fit into the gender stereotype, and he's not interested, which is great because we are encouraging him to be himself, So it really started at that young age. That there is really no one is losing out. Everyone is losing out if there's gender inequality, and everyone is going to benefit if you have gender equality. So it's getting that message across.
Are women, you have great parts of the world where women are being seen as weaker and they lose school days because they have their period. And are they ready to take the power and to lean in, as you were saying?
I do think I have been in parts, for example, it's the Senegal, where I've been in rural areas, whereby girls have never attended school, and they were about to build a school there. And the girls were really excited, but the thing is, if you have never seen an iPhone, you don't want to have an iPhone, do you? So I think that it is what you introduce to girls, and that's what is going to define what they're going to become. And I think it's up to us who have had the opportunity to see the world, experience the world, to go out there and say, hey, it's not only about my rights, but it's also about your rights. Yeah.
We have been talking a little bit about quotas, about maybe always hiring the qualified woman even over the best qualified, being a man, and more drastic measures like that. What do you feel about quotas, for example? What would you say?
So we don't support quotas, we support targets. But we always have said that we want to keep quotas in our back pocket for if we're not hitting our targets. So that's really where we are on quotas.
And
we believe about targets, we believe about measurement and transparency. And that in itself gets you a long way.
And now that we have 11 years to change something that requires 108 years to do, is it about time that we start working towards quotas and other drastic measures?
So I, only looking through the lens of male champions in Australia, we're making change at things like women on boards quite quickly. Where we're not achieving it is around executive roles and women in leadership. It's changing much more slowly. Again, we think some of the initiatives that have been implemented, changing culture will be the most important thing. And a lot of the things we do are around changing culture, disrupting a system that was built essentially by men. But we think in terms of targets rather than quotas at the moment.
So I am obviously pro-quotas. And in Norway, that discussion was actually landed very quickly because the Norwegian first female prime minister said, I'm actually success due to quotas. So it never became a question about quality. If you're given the opportunity and you take it and demonstrate that this was what was needed, it's easier for others to follow and avoid what they fear as being B instead of A quality. Because Gro Harlem Brundtland, later head of WHO, definitely was A quality. So this was probably what landed that discussion in Norway. But what was also very important was the discussion about why it matters. Not only the target setting, but the value it creates. Of course, gender equality as a rights issue is important, but it's actually also something that is quite clever in economic and I would say social terms. And if you look at, and I wonder if people have looked at the GDPs, the Norwegian one is coming pretty high, and people would immediately say, oh, it's due to oil and gas. Actually, it's because of how the human capital has been developed and applied in work life. Mm-hmm. So the value of women's place in the work life is what really tops up the GDP in Norway. And with these arguments that went beyond equality and equal rights, it was a different story. Still, when top executives in operative positions are still at a low number, that's why I go directly to the word power, because people in power don't like the word. So when they're asked, do you have power? They say, oh, I love to influence. I like to contribute. I'm not even sure I belong to the elites. So that's why I go head on. I'm old enough to say, let's realize that together we bake a bigger cake. It's not only take the cake we have and give it away. Together we can do that, bigger cake, and also get beyond in a cultural sense that I know what I have. I don't know what I will get. Because people in life don't like change. We like to stay in our comfort zone. I tend to say that the only person I know that is crying for a change is the small baby crying for a dry diaper. Nobody else. So maybe I have provoked a bit on the quotas.
So regarding the quotas, I feel like we have this discussion that we want more women to be on top or have top positions, but we also forget what kind of women are getting these top positions. Because as a woman of color, am I a part of that number, and do I even qualify to get a top position? So I think it's really important when we talk about quotas, we also talk about who's going to get these jobs.
Yep. There are some there are questions coming in on Slido, and I want to shift over to bringing up some of those. And here's kind of an interesting one, speaking about I want to have influence and speaking with that softer voice, because somebody here's asking, do women have to be bossy, or can a woman lead in a more soft-spoken way rather than becoming similar to the men to get their message through?
Okay, who asked that question?
I want to answer that.
Yeah, you go ahead, Hilde. With the soft voice, please.
Yeah, I'll use my soft voice now. It's a rare one. I don't know. I don't think women have to be bossy. And I don't think women usually are bossy. But they're told they're bossy if they lean in and want to be part and sit around the table and have influence or have power. Very, very quickly that happens. And that's unconscious bias, but it's also a power game. Yeah. And of course, I'm a forward-leaning person, but I've seen leadership both from men and women being soft-spoken and being clear. I'm a clear leader. Others can be more soft-spoken. Both are different ways of leading. We can all improve, so to speak, in doing things better. But my point with bossy is young girls and women, or people that look different and are different, they often are pointed as bossy if they're as clear as any man is.
Yeah, it's about being assertive. And this is the interesting thing, that a man is assertive, and everyone's like, yay, well done, thank you very much.
Yeah.
A woman is assertive, and they're like, oh, you're being bossy, you know. Like I've come across that in the media, even what happened to me, that male presenter extremely vocal and opinionated and arrogant and bossy. All those words fit his personality, and he was celebrated for it. But then if a woman tries to take on those qualities, because, like, let's face it, I don't think anyone wants to be this way, but because of the world that we live in, we have to raise our voices, we have to get angry, because if we don't, nothing's going to change. But it's like the new Nike ad, which I think is brilliant. Yeah. Like, a woman shows her emotion, she's called hysterical. Yeah. You know, if this is what crazy looks like, let's show what crazy does. Yeah. You know, I think that's awesome. Yeah. Yeah.
Can I just comment that a little bit?
You can comment on that.
Yeah, because I think I just want to tell one short story. I had a great conversation with one of my male colleagues in the group executive management of Telenor, and now you can speculate which one that was. But he's extremely assertive. But as he's a man, and we were on the same age, as he's a man, he was celebrated for it. I'm assertive, and I was told I was both emotional and too clear and too bossy. And I actually told him at one time when we had discussed this, if you were a woman, they would lock you up. And I'm pretty sure they would. That's what I mean about it.
But this is probably also about role models. I so agree that we need to see diversity in leadership, and we need to also find those good role models. And I think upcoming people in careers are looking for role models, and still, unfortunately, we have too few. I would say both among women and also from a diversity perspective. So that is really important as leaders to try to promote that as well.
So I've been a substitute teacher, and I remember having this class where boys, they will stand up and then answer when I ask them something. And girls would be like, so I had this thing in class where I began telling girls to stand up and answer the question. And I will not understand the question until they have spoken up. And this took some time, but I could see the difference within that boys could just speak. And I think this starts from home and also starts from schools. Like, how do we allow children to communicate with each other? Do we just let girls sit and be pretty, or do we tell them, hey, speak up, use your voice? And I think this is really necessary, because also being in Denmark and being vocal in Denmark, I'm not only bossy, but I'm also an angry black woman. So that is also because of my color. So there's always...
You're in the same club, you and me.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I think we have to start these things at schools and also in homes to allow our girls to speak up. Yeah.
So it's all the way back to childhood. There are several questions here that is on that topic. How do we teach children about what is gender equality, and how do we in a world of strong existing gender stereotypes, and some are also referring to the role of the media. Being a journalist, I know that this always comes up. It's always the media that ends up being the bad guy. But it could be true that women are more likely to be portrayed as victims and the weak parts and so on and so forth. What role does that play, talking about children, talking about the younger generations?
So I have nieces, and I remember that because when I was younger, my mom would always tell me, sit like a lady, like sit like a girl. And I remember that my nieces she was playing and she had her legs open. And I remember just telling her, sit nicely. And then I had to be like, no, just sit the way you want. Because the only reason I was telling her to sit like that was because of her gender, and it was something that I was taught from my mother. So I think it's really about checking yourself. Checking yourself when you talk to your daughter or your nieces. How do you speak to them? Do you allow them to play the same way as boys play, or do you put them in a box because they are girls?
Can I just comment? No, because for me this is so interesting, because I've only realized this recently. Training to be a psychotherapist, you have to be in personal therapy every week, and you have group process, and you have lectures. So very much all my stuff is right up here. So emotions are all up here. But I only realized recently when a daughter came along, I found it really hard to buy girls' clothes for her. I found it really hard to put pink on her, and it was really bothering me. I was like, why would I rather put her in blue? Like, easy for me to put pink on my son than put pink on the girl. And then I realized I was shaming her, and I didn't realize, okay, I carry shame because I'm a lesbian, I carry shame because I'm a migrant, I carry shame because I have mental health issues and experience sexual abuse. But the oldest shame that I carry, and this is at a cellular level, is the shame of being a woman. Because at a very early stage, I must have realized that somehow the boys are better because of things like your conversation about period. It's like boys don't have that. So when you have that internal shame that I think a lot of women have no idea until you start digging into your stuff, that shame actually stops you from speaking out, from thinking that you deserve. There's plenty of research that shows women don't go for jobs that they're fully qualified and experienced to do, but men will go for those jobs even if they're even halfway, qualified. So they have that confidence, but women don't, and that's because somewhere in our minds we think we don't deserve that.
But if that is true, then this reproduces itself, because if the shame of being a woman holds you back and always puts you in second place, it reproduce itself.
Not in this case.
How do you break that?
Yeah, not in this case, because I figured it out. Because my daughter is 18 months. I've realized this, and today I went to magazine and I bought her a couple of dresses, and I was like, look at me, I'm in the girls section buying dresses for my daughter. This is amazing, because I want her to be able to, if she wants to be feminine, if she wants to be girly, absolutely do that. But I'm not going to hold her back, and I'm not going to pass on that shame. The buck stops with me.
In professional life, I think this is why unconscious biases have become rightly very much at the center of how to address parts of this problem as well. We clone ourselves probably more than we are conscious about. So addressing, for instance, hires, recruitments with a conscious approach to unconscious biases, I think is a driver of change. And actually, what do we call qualified? How do we identify what qualifies you for a job? I remember when we talked about quotas, and as I think some of you mentioned, quotas came because actually men were favored for thousands of years. And when you enter a new arena, you have the power to define what is qualification. And the minute you sort of let go and say you can qualify in different ways, you have a very good conversation. And this was, of course, one of the discussions that occurred when quotas came up, because qualifications seemed to be given by birth, as long as it was only men who competed for the positions. But once female wanted to join, it became an issue. So there must be something that has to do with how we define competencies too.
Stephen Fitzgerald.
I just was good, because I agree with everything that's said. I think some of the other things that we've looked at are doing things like eliminating everyday sexism. The little things that happen every day in every organization, and being conscious to the unconscious bias and training people about it. And then as leaders of an organization, it's really about what you say, what you do, and what you prioritize. And if you make a big effort to eliminate everyday sexism. So, in Melbourne, everyone talking about the football on Monday morning. And it's unintended sexism in the office. Not just sexism, because it eliminates actually all different groups as well. So it's really being very focused on unconscious bias and being on top of it every single day.
Oh, I want to talk about a thing that Kira said in her speech about that, because there can be backlash, can't there? If you address a little everyday sexism, you might end up with a backlash like the one that has come after the Me Too movement.
Yeah.
Where you actually have people that, men, to be honest, that feel accused and feel like something's being taken away from them, and well, frankly, they act like they're being suppressed or something. How do you avoid that?
Yeah, we've had backlash in Australia from this initiative.
Yeah.
It was meant to be controversial. It was. Liz was very brave as a sex discrimination commissioner to put together a group, an all-male group, and call it what it is, male champions of change. Some of us would prefer just champions of change. But you've got to be on top of it every day. And we saw it recently with some of the corporate failures in Australia, where if the chair was a woman, they were talking about how she looked and how she dressed and she had kids. And if the chair was a male, it was focused on the business side. And it's every day. It's in the media. The media has something to answer for as well.
Yeah, big time.
Yeah, I've seen exactly the same. And you can have backlashes and you will have discussions along the way. Because for instance, if you set targets or you have the quota discussion or whatever you have, there will be people feeling unfairly treated and losing out on something. And that's why I think what you mentioned in your talk is extremely important, and that's redefinition of merits. And it's moving from being qualified due to your gender and your age and your tone of skin to actually what you're doing, and then focusing on the business and not on the clothing or the chairwoman or whatever.
I also think it's really important. All of these things aren't just to benefit women.
No.
Or men. This is about creating a more effective workforce, a more effective business or a more effective government agency. In our case, a more effective army. The capability is what they're focused on. And part of that is diversity and part of that is gender diversity.
And that comes with, that's what I wanted to end with, it comes with leadership.
And there's a comment here. Isn't it easier to talk about the effect that is increased profitability of earnings or economic growth to which gender equality is a tool than it is to speak of unfairness? Just a comment on that. And speaking about economy, there's a question here that's kind of interesting for this taking place in Scandinavia. What specific measures are being taken in gender equal Scandinavian countries to close pay gap? So pay gap is an issue, isn't it? And what measures are we taking here? You're talking about goals and targets as to how many women are on the boards and the direction. But how about the pay gap?
I've been part of non-executive boards, and I still am, where we really drive transparency. And it's on stock-listed companies in Scandinavia. It's by law that you should show and discuss the pay gap, if there's any, and what you do about it. And if you show the numbers, it's kind of a wall of shame, and you will have to do something about it. And then you do what you do in business. You do analysis, and it becomes obvious that some things are wrong, or you see it's actually moving in the right direction.
Can we end gender inequality without closing the pay gap?
No.
Can I just add to that, because I completely agree. We've got a big focus at the moment on ending the gender pay gap in sport. Australians, like many countries, love their sport, but we've got Cricket Australia, Tennis Australia, the AFL, the rugby, and soccer, football. The CEOs of all of those and others coming together with a real campaign around ending gender equality in sport in terms of pay. And why that's really important is these are role models for young people, and we're going to do it over the next 2 or 3 years. So they really focus on it. And there is a report on the Male Champions website on that initiative. I think sport is important because they're role models.
Pay gap is also about trade unions. Many countries negotiate salaries, and to challenge trade unions more on what they want to do to close the gap, I think is a key issue. And sports, I'm glad you mentioned that. I think transparency is really important. If you look at this part of the world, handball has been quite quite a sport. And in some countries, the women's team, much better than male. When it was disclosed, it was still demonstrated that the men were paid significantly more. They felt actually the pressure, the heat so hard that they voluntarily wanted to balance out more between the men and women. I think transparency is really important. And media, when will they stop always showing men who are winning? For instance, now in the Winter World Championship, they always put the male winner up first if on the same day there is a man and a woman winning. Well, I say always. Maybe it's not always, but I would say 90+%.
The other thing that we've found really important in sport is not just the pay gap, but it's access. Access to facilities, access to playing fields, the better times to play a sport, and that starts right at the small kid level.
Addressing the kids again. We focused a little bit about education, kids. We focused a little bit about on business. Let's focus on societies. There's a question here: to achieve further equality in business, but also in society, do national policies need to be modified? And is this happening?
So I work for the UN.
Yes.
And policies are, of course, at the heart of this effort, but it's not enough. It needs to be followed by action. It needs to be, I think, also working together, public and private, introducing innovative ways of working. So how you actually reach targets or a better future quicker, maybe more cost efficient. It may even be in a completely new way. This is at the core of our agenda. I think it's so important that we look at the full scale, including policies.
So if we are to wrap this up a little bit and look forward, we have 11 years to achieve what is calculated to take 108. So we're in a hurry. So if you are to mention one thing that you are going to do from here and one thing that you wish for somebody else to do, what would that be, wanting to achieve that goal in 11 years?
Well, I'm going to focus on where I am, and I'm in business. And I'm going to continue, and maybe even stronger than before, being more experienced, being in position, actually, to talk about this and to deliver on females being part of the decision-making in business on all levels, all the way from the top, and not let anyone die in their shame.
And if you were to point at somebody else to do something, what would that be?
I would, for instance, say, and then again with a business focus, I would say owners, investors should have this on their agenda with respect to appointment of board members, appointment of CEOs, appointment of executive vice presidents on their top managements. Because when you do that, you get the critical mass and it will start cascading. And I'm a believer of business being part of developing societies, so it's going to influence societies if we do that.
Thank you. Greta Verma, you've touched on it before, but what is the sole thing that you will do and what you encourage others to do to achieve this goal?
We would always in UNOPS focus impact.
Yes.
So we are in infrastructure. How can we impact in a conscious way what is a better gender-balanced solution. I mean, if we advise in building schools, health clinics, roads in a manner that is not promoting gender equality, it will stick for 30 years or even longer. And public procurement, how can we support through innovation or in working with governments and private sector solutions that benefit gender better than what they have done so far. So in all we do, we would like to highlight in a more informed way the impact on gender.
Mary, what are you going to do from here? And if you were to point at somebody else and say, you have to do this, what would that be?
I think the first thing I will point out will be that when we do projects, when we do policies, that we do not do them with Western eyes. Because the thing with menstruation has been here since we've been on this earth. But for 2 years ago, we began talking about menstruation keeping girls away from school. Mm-hmm. So it worries me a lot that when we do projects from Western countries, that we do forget essential things, and that means that we leave women behind. And I think what I'm going to do is basically try to understand my privilege as a woman, since being a Danish woman and a Ugandan woman, and how I can use these privileges to help other women who do not have them.
Mm-hmm.
I think the recognition that all of what we're talking about doesn't just benefit women, it actually benefits men and women and creates, I like the term, a bigger pie. So maybe a smaller slice of a bigger pie. And I think that's the most important thing, that these aren't just about initiatives to benefit women, it's the whole of society.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to point to somebody else and say and encourage them to do something, or is that the same, really?
Same. Oh, we are about, at Liz's initiative, engaging men in this, and I do think you have to engage men. Women will achieve it, but it'll take longer. If you're engaging both sexes, you'll achieve it much more quickly.
Dil, what are you doing from now? What are you going to do about this? And what do you need others to do?
Yeah. Well, for me, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing from the point of view of speaking out, because I think when I spoke out, there was an attempt there to silence me.
Yes.
And I'll be honest with you, I did think about
being silent.
Yeah. And I think when you get that knock in life, everybody has experienced that. You doubt yourself. You think maybe I did the wrong thing. Maybe I shouldn't have done that. But I realized, my goodness, it's like the proudest thing I ever did in my life. So I'm going to keep doing that.
Being a proud troublemaker.
Yeah, a troublemaker, absolutely. And I'm going to encourage others to speak out. And people of all gender, because the thing is, sometimes like this is when if you see racism or homophobia or whatever, usually the victims find it very hard to speak out because they're in shock. They're like, oh my God, how did this happen to me? So it's the bystanders, it's the people who are watching this that have an opportunity to do something about it. So of all genders, because I'm very conscious, we always talk about men and women, but there's people who don't identify as men and women, yes. Non-binary people, anywhere you are on the spectrum. And that's another thing. I think we should really start looking at gender as a continuum, as a spectrum, and maybe that might actually help us all get rid of the gender inequality. Yeah.
Well, that's an encouragement for sure. Thank you for that. All right, so we have here a panel of people who have promised to try to deliver on women being decision makers going forward, to have focus on impact in any politics, really, infrastructure, whatever, to have focus on the gender balance in their solutions that are chosen, and to encourage the private sector to do likewise. We have focus on projects and politics, not just to be seen upon with Western eyes. A very important point. We have the recognition that these measures don't just benefit women, they benefit all of us. Very important point. And then the promise to keep making trouble. Yes. Panel, thank you very much for your thoughts and your reflections and your solutions. Thank you so much for your reflections, your questions, and your wonderful comments. I didn't get through all of them, but I was trying to collect them a little bit. Now, His Excellency Benedikt Wechsler has quite a job now, delivering a closing reflection, since there's been so many great remarks and great reflections up here on the panel. But let's see what he has to say. Now you have to do that thing again, you know.
Oh, thank you, Mette. I don't know why I accepted this this challenge. Friday afternoon, outside, sun is shining, and I stand between this and your weekend. And after such a panel with all these contributions, I really don't have much to add. And maybe it's because I'm from Switzerland, and today it's part of history of our country. Because 50 years ago, the women of Switzerland went to the Parliament Square in Bern, claiming their natural political rights to have the right to vote. And they had to wait 63 years longer at that time than the Finns. They got it 2 years later, in 71. And the only thing is, Liechtenstein was a few years later, in 84. The good message is, in between, we had several Swiss presidents, and we had a majority of women in the government. So it has changed, and it has changed for the good. I've noted 3 things while listening to this fantastic contribution. I think the first one is, we're always talking about empowerment of less developed countries or women. I think we have to empower men. And empower men to be able to withstand and don't be afraid of bossy Hildes or crying Gretas. I think also to have like male champions like Stephen. I think there we need empowerment men. I've been chief of staff of the Swiss Minister of Foreign Affairs, who was a lady, who was a woman. She was also president, and I saw very often then in the press, even when she changed her glasses, you know, it was headline news next day in the newspaper. And I mean, all the other male members of the government, they could have changed glasses as much as they wanted. They would never had the headlines. And of course, she was very upset because, you know, they should talk about my political work and not my glasses. So I was also sensibilized. And I think also what Kira mentioned, I think, is a very second important point, the tech and the digital world. I mean, we're not entering, we're in the midst of the digital world. And I think if we don't watch out, we're losing something, a different world coming up where our discussions here can become irrelevant. And I think it's also a chance, because you see more and more women who have taken up responsibilities in the tech world. They are very, very successful in the digital world. So I think it's also a chance that this will level out. The digital world is more transparent. It's a process which you can compare more easily. So I think also the tech and the digital has a great chance for gender equality. Then the third thing, I was wondering, we're always talking about gender. And we also had in our ministry a process of defining a foreign policy vision for 2028. And there was different subjects on a blog, and there was also a gender blog. And then I looked into the blog and said there were only women participating in that blog. No single male diplomat was, including myself. I didn't participate in that blog. I just looked it up this morning and was, hey, how many men did actually participate? So that again, I mean, we have to bring more men into discussion. When I had my first job in New York at the UN 20 years ago, of course, you always get not the most sexy issues like the Security Council and everything, but so I was sent to the CEDAW Commission, Commission for Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. And I came into this room, and the only man next to me was the representative of the Holy See. I said, no, this is not how you will get this issue further. I think it's good that Switzerland and the Holy See were listening, because we were both at that time not champions, so this was okay, but still you need more men in the room. And then I think maybe also we should, sometimes it's also about like labeling and the gender label. I like very much the diversity label that we heard all the time, because it is much more open, it's much more inclusive, and when I look at the world today, I mean, I think the most successful economies and societies are the societies that are diverse. Switzerland, we have 25% of our population is from foreign origin. We're not Swiss. 2 million out of 8 million. We have the top CEOs of our Swiss bank, Credit Suisse, is from Africa. We have the top CEO of Novartis. He's US American, but with an Asian background. And that goes not only for the sex, but also for backgrounds, different experiences, and so on. Finally, I think what's also very important is that these discussions shouldn't be boring. And I think this definitely was a proof that you were on the right track. It wasn't boring at all. Because that's the worst thing. If the discussion gets boring, people just leave the room. And it also should be joyful. That's why also I think a menstruation party, I think these are right answers to tackle these issues. And I'm also in my last year here in Copenhagen. I will leave for San Francisco as a sort of a Swiss tech ambassador. And when I'm thinking about unfinished business, my successor is a woman. So on the Swiss embassy, there will be an all-women team. The only male left is the driver. And now, but looking back at the diversity, maybe also I didn't finish my business well, because we'll lose maybe a little bit. We need more diversity again. But at least I'm proud to leave an almost all-women embassy, Swiss embassy in Denmark, when I leave in the summer. And I hope also that this discussion here and this series of inputs will continue. And I think it's a great place to discuss this. And thank you for letting me share some of the thoughts with you. And wish you also a good weekend.
Some of you are going to proceed to the VIP reception that you have received invites for. And for the rest of you, I encourage you to go out in the sun in Copenhagen, maybe enjoy a menstruation party. Thank you, and have a nice weekend.